Welcome once again to our lesson series, Women Break Free. I am really enjoying this lesson series. I hope you guys are. It's been a lot of fun to not only like study these topics and present them to you because they're sort of my big theme of my life, to freedom and women and empowerment and that sort of thing. But also I like a lot of these things. I like to just sort of get them into a nice, neat little format. It sort of has forced me to take these topics and put them in a format of teaching, with these slides and these silly little pictures and things that it works for me. It makes sense for me. I don't know if it works for anybody else, but sometimes it's like making a list, post-it notes and things like that. You got to get all that stuff out of your head and put it onto something. And for me, when it's these type of teaching topics, it is nice to force myself to do this. And so for these Women Break Free topics, I really enjoyed this, and thank you guys for putting up with me and letting me go through all of these different things. So we've covered for our for this particular series, I can't believe it, but we've now, tonight's going to be our 10th topic. We've hit some kind of big stuff, but really barely hit them. I know some of them I've gone like a full hour talking, and you're thinking, how in the world could there be even more to some of this stuff? But there's so much more. There's so much more depth to a lot of the Bible verses. Guy, I've told you a million times, I'm not a theologian. I'm definitely a big time amateur, but so the depth of the Hebrew language and the Greek language and the theologies that go one way or the other, and how churches and denominations have taken these verses or these passages, these ideas, these themes, and what they've done with them, good and bad, has been our history. It's our Christianity and the history of us. And we do know, though, I think it's pretty obvious, even us nice equal Americans, that that there is a lot of difficulty for women, and we need to figure out why. We need to figure out where it's coming from, be able to address it, to take care of ourselves, sometimes to deal with issues of guilt or shame that may have been put on us unnecessarily or unbiblically, or sometimes maybe we've done that to someone else, and we need to help them realize, maybe to our own sons or daughters, or grandchildren, as we're raising them and saying, this is what modesty is about. This is what it means to be a powerful woman or a powerful young man, and a godly person. So all of these things are important for us, just to continue to walk in freedom and in love above all things. So tonight I'm going to do kind of two topics, as I mentioned in the email I sent out. One of them is about the topic of divorce, because one of you guys a while back said, hey, can you talk about that? So I am. We're going to talk about that super briefly. I mean, well, brief for me, you guys know how that goes, but I'm not going to go like totally as deep as I totally could on that. But, I took a few of the passages that people do like to use when they're talking about this topic. And then we're also going to talk about the more of a theme about women and women as protectors. It's a very big theme in my life. I have a feeling it probably is in a lot of your lives, and it's something that can be powerful and also difficult. So we're going to look at a passage that I have kind of recently discovered. I've read that whole Bible, but sometimes I missed a few things. So let me share my screen. Hopefully you guys can all see what I'm laying down here. We got, you should be able to see our beautiful 315 logo right up there at the top. There we go. And remember, if I can't see your face, please don't fall asleep on me. But I can only see a few of you at a time up there at the top of my screen. But I do like a nice little applause or a laugh if I make a joke, but because most of the time I have no idea what I'm doing. All right, so here we go tonight, you guys. Our first little topic of the evening: God and divorce. A difficult topic. I know several of you have been through divorces. I have not been divorced, but in my family, there are my parents, there and my husband's parents, and there's divorces all over the place. So we do live in America, and it is a pretty common thing in marriages these days, and has been for quite a while. That actually has probably some good and some bad to it. Divorce in and of itself, I should not get off my slides here, but here I go. Divorce in and of itself, bad. Anytime that there's a separation of two people who came together in a joyful union, that's terrible. But sometimes recognizing that the union was not put together by God, or was not healthy in the first place, the freedom that women now have, and started getting about, early 70s or so, started recognizing, that feminist movement that we've talked about historically, that kind of started this uprising of kind of coming down on men and women in their roles, was that women were starting to say, hey, I want a divorce. I don't like this. Something's wrong here. And as we do as humans, we kind of went from one extreme to another. Well, now we're just going to get divorced quickly and easily, and we made it easier in certain states, in certain places, to get quick marriages, quick divorces, and things like that. So I'm not really here I go off again. I'm not really going to take a dive into the sanctity of marriage and divorce and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to talk about a couple of passages that people do use when they do talk about this particular topic. Here's one of the big ones, okay? Malachi 2:16. The way it is in some Bibles, it says, I hate divorce, says the Lord. This is something you may or may not have heard. Well, God says he hates divorce. He hates divorce. God hates divorce. Important when we read a verse like this that puts a big proclamation on something. It's important to really know if that is actually what it says. This Bible verse has been quoted many, many times to give this ultimate declaration of why a godly person should not divorce a spouse. And divorce is a terrible, horrible thing. It's heartbreaking. It's horrific to our souls, to our spirits. If you believe that that the joining of get together of two people in unity, whether it's through intercourse only or by the vows and the union of two people physically and with their vows spiritually and things like that, then the tearing apart of that thing is a horrible thing. It's a spiritual breaking and a tearing that is not anything I wish on anyone. It's a bad thing, but we should stop saying this phrase just simply as it is. God hates divorce, because it may not be quite a proper representation of scripture of what this verse really is saying. Pronouncing that God hates divorce on someone or to someone or about a situation, just saying that phrase can bring hurt and confusion. It can bring shame, feelings of condemnation on Christians. Even if you're just reading it in a book or hearing somebody else talk about it, it can bring that, and shame can make us do pretty awful things and can bring us to places that are difficult to come out of. And Christians who are divorced or considering divorce, just hearing that phrase without someone helping them work through the real meaning of that can be more devastating than just helping, than just even the divorce itself. So this pronouncement, it doesn't really help our bigger mission of being followers of Christ and bringing healing and hope through the gospel. But this verse in Malachi, it can be used to coerce or guilt a person who's been wronged or abused as a spouse, and it can try to coerce them to stay in a harmful marriage. Mainly what I want to talk about tonight is this concept in regard to abusive type situations, okay? I'll kind of dive into a couple of the other aspects, but mainly about abuse. In the Hebrew, so let's go to this verse, Malachi 2:16, that people say, it says God hates divorce. It actually does not say that. It says I hate. It does not say I hate, as in God saying I hate. It is not a first person singular. I hate chocolate. Oh my gosh, that's a horrible thing to say. But I hate, puppies, whatever the horrible thing is that you're saying. That's not what it says. It's actually, and now let's go back to our English class, third person masculine singular, and it's God. It's rather God says he who hates, the person or the man who hates and that's a really big difference, you guys. God saying I hate divorce, or the man who hates, and we're going to go further into the verse. That's a really big difference. The he seems to be a man who hates and divorces his wife, and in so doing behaves unjustly toward her. So this verse seems to be talking about God's making this, saying that he who hates a woman or and hates her and divorces her is doing an injustice to her. That's a really big difference from God just declaring, I hate divorce. A divorced woman in Bible times, of course, we know this, a very vulnerable, a disadvantaged position to be in. You really had no power. A better translation would be, if you hate and send away or divorce your woman. What it was talking about was someone who was deciding they didn't like their wife anymore and was just divorcing her, which, as we know, us wonderful Bible scholars, we do know that if you're a woman who has no husband, you have nothing. You have very little that you can hold on to, because your recognition in your society, your social status, your economics, all of that was almost mostly primarily based on your relationship with your husband, or your family if you hadn't been married yet. So, and of course, if you have children, another part of it as well. So to be able to just send a wife away was an evil thing, is what God was saying. To just send her away because you have decided to divorce her, to send her away. This is something that God hates, because it's an injustice to someone who is in a vulnerable place. But it's actually not saying anything about God hating. It's saying, if you, man, you, sir, if you hate and your woman and are sending her away and giving her divorce, that is the bad part of it. That's the bad thing. It makes it, if you read it this way, it makes it clear that God is speaking about someone else and he is not the one doing the hating. The idea of God hating divorce or saying he hates divorce is most likely because that's the way they translated it in the King James back in the 1600s. And we still have that sort of, those types of those words, those phrases in our heads, and we still kind of will say it. But it's important to do a deeper dive if you're going to make a big pronouncement on someone about something like that, or about a topic like that. You better look a little bit deeper. And using God to make big giant pronouncements on someone that would bring shame or guilt on them is wrong. It's just simply wrong. And I think God hates that part too. A better job of translating this passage is now being done. If you actually will look in your translations, go to your BibleGateway.com or some of those other things, your apps on your phone, and look up this particular passage in the different translations and type it in and see how they're translating it now. They have been changing it over the last few years, decades of updating the translations, of getting a better understanding of the Hebrew, and looking at what the more depth of the meaning. And so they're seeing these different, a better version of translations. So now the newest New International Version says it this way: the man who hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord, the God of Israel, does violence to the one he should protect, says the Lord Almighty. So be on your guard and do not be unfaithful. If he hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord God of Israel, he covers his garment with injustice, says the Lord of armies. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully and do not act treacherously. They're a little bit different. So you can see that it must be a difficult verse to translate, but what we are seeing now is this concept is not of God hating it. It's he's saying he who hates and divorces his wife, this is considered a negative, a bad thing. So how are we doing? Clear as mud so far? Okay, so we got that one big verse. Okay, then we also have to go to some things that Jesus said. We, the church, have also misunderstood some of the statements Jesus made on divorce, and it has brought more suffering and scandal to Christians who have left abusive marriages. I can name people in my family who, back in the day, they got a divorce, and I had like this great uncle and aunt, and he was a preacher in a certain denomination, but they got a divorce, so he was never allowed to be a preacher anymore, and he couldn't be a pastor of a church anymore. And I mean, I don't know what all the things were. That's like one of my family history kind of things, but you hear about that kind of stuff. And I know of stories in these days about churches that women, very recently, a very large church made a pretty big deal to a woman who had to was trying to quietly leave her marriage because of her husband's addiction to porn and possibly some other very negative things that he had done to people. And so she decided to divorce him, and the church declared that she was not allowed to do that, and sent out a letter to the entire church saying that she was in the wrong and that they should shun her. I don't know if that's the official word that they use, but it was quite a big deal. And that has a lot to do with churches that have membership contracts and things like that, that they have the right to do that. They actually legally have the right to do that. Anyway, but the problem they had with her was that she was divorcing her husband and that she should be willing to stay and work it out. Now, I don't know all the parameters. That's what she decided to do. And it was a pretty difficult situation that she was in. And I've heard a few other stories along kind of those lines. But it has to do with this big giant idea that God hates all divorce. You should never divorce at all, no matter what. And it can be pretty difficult and bring a lot of suffering to those who have been in an abusive situation. So Jesus himself was questioned about divorce by the Pharisees, and they may have been trying to trick him. They were always trying to trick him. We know that. Or perhaps to get him to say something bad against Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, just like John the Baptist had done. John the Baptist was sitting in jail because and ended up getting beheaded because he kept making statements about Herod and his divorce, and Herod did not like that, and he dealt with John the Baptizer very harshly. Herod and his new wife Herodias had recently divorced their previous partners so that they could marry each other, and the whole town was talking about it. There's actually some other historical documents outside of our Bibles that talk about this situation that was going on with them. This may have been the context of the Pharisees asking Jesus about this particular teaching. And in the passage in Mark, he says, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if a wife divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. So that sounds, if you just take that passage and you just throw it at somebody who's thinking about or going through divorce, it looks like, wow, I mean, if you get a divorce, that's adultery. You know how adultery is. God's against adultery. That's a big sin. One of those commandments, and so it can really come down harshly on that person. But the Pharisees had been engaged in this debate within themselves about the grounds for divorce in Deuteronomy. They, within their own little Pharisaical group, had been discussing it, and they brought Jesus into it to see if they could kind of trip him up, it seems like. Some of the rabbis were teaching that if a husband found anything at all wrong with his wife, he could divorce her, and it could be based on if she didn't cook a meal well, or if he found someone else more attractive than her, then he could divorce his wife and he could go to another. There were some who believed that, and they believed that the certain words in the passages from Deuteronomy about some husband and wife stuff, we're not going into all those, but that gave them legitimate reason to. So it was all about this power that the husband had. It was all about the husband's right. Should he have the right to do this or not have the right? And pretty unfair to women, as usual. And they wanted to get Jesus into this debate, and one of their like big pet topics. And Jesus, as usual, cut to the chase, answered their question, took the conversation in a different direction, and went all the way back to creation. He says, haven't you read that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female? And God said, because of this, a man should leave his father and mother and be joined together with his wife, and the two will be one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, humans must not pull apart what God has put together. He goes all the way back, and so what he does is he focuses on the specialness of a man and a woman coming together. That this was the original creation. This is something that is a special sacred thing, that when two people are come together as one, and to take care of the planet. I mean, that's why Adam and Eve were put there together, right? To dominate the world, to have dominion and take care of things, take care of the garden and all that good stuff. That's what they were there together to do. And it's this beautiful glimpse of this ideal marriage of one man, one woman. They're perfectly suited together. They're intimate, exclusive, mutual. They're safe. It's a lifelong partnership. That is what Jesus is saying is the ideal. That's what we all want, is the ideal. When we walk up there to the altar, that's our ideal, right? but we're humans, and so it sometimes it goes sideways kind of quickly. Sometimes not for a while. Sometimes not at all. Jesus seemed to be saying that this is what men and women should be aspiring to in marriage. In his comments on divorce to the Pharisees, Jesus specifically addressed the Pharisees' debate on divorce. His comments were not meant to be a big comprehensive statement on every divorce and all the permissible reasons for divorce. He was trying to give this understanding of what is the ideal. He reminds them of the ideal marriage. He explains that divorcing one person in order to marry another is immoral and it's adultery. Just like he said, looking on someone in lust is adultery. What he's saying is, if you do not have, your eye on the prize, so to speak, a probably bad way to say it, but if you do not understand what this ideal is, what God wants between two human beings, a sacred joining of love, of taking care of one another, of protecting one another and rescuing one another and supporting one another in all that God has for each of you. That is the ideal. And to look away from that person or to throw them out and to go to someone else is the same as an adultery situation. It's not truly honoring what is this special, holy, sacred thing. It is possible, even probable, that all of Jesus' statements about adultery in respect to divorce, remarriage, were given in context of someone divorcing one person with the express aim of marrying another particular person. I have some passages there, and it seems that it's possible, not telling you I'm a big theologian on all this, I haven't studied all of it, but it is possible that he's mostly talking about someone who is, like we talked about in Malachi, throwing one person away to go to someone else. That does tend to be, in this time period, a male issue, but it probably wasn't always, because we have the example of Herodias. Apparently she had done it herself. Women could do it as well. They could divorce, and probably if you were in a better situation, you might be willing to do it, if you had money or power of some sort as a woman. Most of the time, we think of it as being the men who did it, but in general, I guess more specifically, Jesus is just saying, if you're doing that to hurt someone, it's wrong. Flat out. It means that someone who divorces their spouse because of betrayal or abuse, but later finds a new partner and marries them, that's not committing adultery. That's not what I don't believe that's what Jesus is saying there. That he's not saying that if you get divorced and you end up with someone else, you haven't committed adultery just because you had intercourse with someone else, you've married someone else, you got a new legal. That's not what, I don't believe that's what he is saying here. He's talking about the abuse of throwing someone away, of betraying someone, in that sense. But if you have been divorced, if someone has divorced you, betrayed you, or abused you, or you're in that sort of situation, you find a new partner, that is not committing adultery. I know people in churches, and it's one of those things I heard about when I was a kid, that it was talked about in churches that's what was happening. And that's why, if you got a divorce, you couldn't be a pastor, you couldn't be an elder, you couldn't be this or that. There's a passage that talks about elders have to be the only have had one spouse or something like that. Some people were translated as wife, but it's actually just spouse. So it can be women too as elders, but so what they use is, they said, well, that means that if you've been divorced, then you can't be an elder in the church, or you can't be a deacon, or you can't be a pastor, a preacher, or that kind of thing. So if somebody had been through a divorce, you couldn't do that. Some churches still hold to that. So it does make a difference how you translate these verses and how you look at this. Jesus replied to the Pharisees had the potential to protect married women. Ooh, Jesus did a lot of protecting of married women, you guys. If you're looking, you'll find it. It doesn't take that much. You'll see it very clearly. Jesus would not have wanted wives to be divorced and dumped by their husbands for no real reason. And the opposite as well. Wouldn't want husbands to be dumped by wives. Sorry that I seem to be harping on the men there, but it's true both ways. The Bible expresses a clear mandate that we are to protect vulnerable people from injustice. We completely miss the point of Jesus' remarks to the Pharisees and elsewhere if we insist that a spouse must remain with an abusive partner in a harmful marriage. We are to provide consolation and care and support in harmful, abusive type situations, if you hear about that from someone, man or woman, you need to help them to get out of that, to help them to be safe and healthy. Many Christians have a holy fear of divorce, and that can be a good thing. Yet divorce is never mentioned in the list of sins or vices in any New Testament letter, including in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where people like to use that when they're talking about divorce as well. We're not going to go into that one tonight. But in our resource page, I will put a couple of cool articles that I have found. So some Christians think that all marriages are sacred. In some marriages, however, they're not. They're not sacred. They are terrible. Above all, though, people are more sacred than marriages. People are more sacred than marriages, especially in abusive marriages. I do tend to, if someone starts talking to me about that they're worried, I'll just, since we're talking about mainly about women, I'll just talk about women here, but I know it can go both ways. But if a woman comes, a friend or someone I know is telling me that what seems to be sort of an abusive situation and they're wanting to get out of it, I start getting very practical with them. I start saying, are you safe? Do you need help? Do you need to be taken care of? Do you know where your money is? Can you take care of your money? Do you know where are there things that can hurt you in the house? Or how about your kids? Do we need to help you get to a shelter? Things like that. So I kind of go through those things. I get practical and sometimes maybe a little too practical. I'm not sure, because I do believe in reconciliation. I definitely believe. I know of marriages that have been this close to being over, that someone or maybe both have done bad things, horrible things to each other, affairs or things like that. I'm mostly talking about that kind of thing. And they've been able to come to a place of forgiveness, and they've been able to come to a place where they end up having a fruitful and happy and blessed, healthy marriage for many years later. But they have to walk through the steps. They have to find love that covers the multitude of sins. They have to walk through the forgiveness, and they have to ask God, were we supposed to be together in the first place? I think that's question number one. And you often have to have someone else help you ask that question, or go to someone who is a good, wise counselor that you respect, because sometimes you can't hear that yourself if you're in the middle of some craziness. So it's a really long process. I definitely believe in the beauty and the greatness and wonderfulness of marriage. But in an abusive situation, if you know of people who are, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse or a combination, which usually can be a combination of those, or it can be, you need to help them, come alongside them and help them to be safe, first of all, and know that God is not mad at them. God is not mad if a divorce happens. God is sad and wants them to be okay and bring healing to them. But the word itself is not a condemnation. People need to be cared for and protected and loved, and not unwillingly sacrificed for this ideal of, well, marriage is what God wants above all, so you just have to stick with it. Biblical regulations, instructions, including those about divorce, they have to be applied with wisdom and kindness, gentleness, love, above all things. Help people to walk through those things carefully. I am definitely not promoting divorce, but if a marriage or a home is unsafe, we must not just allow people to leave. We need to help people leave. We need to help them, to care for them and protect them. And it can be difficult because people, are protective of their spouse. Sometimes they don't tell all the details. You need to help them get to counseling if you can, and good counseling. Not every church offers great counseling. Just because you got pastor behind your name or even counselor behind your name does not mean it's always good. So there's a lot of things to work through if you're helping somebody with this. But I just, in general, just wanted to lay out a couple of little passages for you that had to do with that particular topic. And there are, like I said, on our resource page, I'll put a few more things for you guys if you want to look through some other stuff. But above all, God loves us. He wants us to take care of one another. He does love marriage. He definitely does. We also know that Paul says, I would rather you just stay single. God can do more with you when you're out there doing stuff for the Lord on just listening to God, not having to worry about, a spouse and what they need. But he also knows that we love to be with people. We love to be with a spouse. We love to have somebody to travel our life together with. So he definitely loves that for us. But as I've told all of my children and many other people, whew, marriage is tough, you guys. It's two people trying to love and give of themselves and take from someone else. And oh my gosh, it's a tough haul. So you gotta go into it with eyes wide open. So so anyway, so all that to say, take care of people as they're walking through all that. Now, topic number 2 of the evening, we are going to talk about women as protectors. Woohoo! One of my favorite topics, because this is me, you guys. I mean, this is I'm one of those Enneagram number 8s that's my primary personality trait is as a protector. It gets me in so much trouble, but and it gets my mouth and myself in trouble, and even my heart in trouble. But I think all women are. Now, once again, I know that men are also protectors, but this is a women's study, so we're going to talk primarily about women. And I want to tell you a story about in the Word that is kind of a story that sort of came to me. I just sort of ran across it, and it's something I've been sitting on for a while, and I've been wanting to kind of teach on it and see what I ended up discovering more about it. So let's jump into that. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing my mama bear necklace just to stick with the theme, got to go with the theme. Okay, women who protect is a very common story in the Bible. I don't know if you guys know that, because we see a whole lot of stories about men fighting. We got the swords and we got the left-handed and we got the trumpets and we got the shields and the horses and outrunning chariots and all that good stuff. And we got women doing some pretty cool protecting too, but you don't really hear a lot about that. It's not a big common sermon theme. Hey, let's talk about all the women who are out there doing battle. But all of you guys who I know who are wonderful Christian women, I know you guys as powerful protectors, and you see these amazing women in the Word. Plus, I talk about them all the time in our study. We have to look deeper, though, to see these stories within the stories. These stories about these women are often not highlighted. They're not given their own book. They don't usually have their own chapter heading. We have to look and see, oh, there's like this whole passage, it mentions this woman, Jael, or it mentions this woman, the wise woman of Abel Beth Makkah. She doesn't even get her name mentioned, but oh yeah, and there's Deborah too. She's got like a cool chapter. She gets her own heading, but most of them don't get that. We got Ruth and Esther. That's about it. Mary didn't even get her own book, but she definitely deserved it if anybody did. But if we look a little bit deeper into these stories within stories, we can see women doing some pretty amazing things. And of course, in ancient times, we know women were vulnerable, they're disadvantaged, they're less educated for the most part, less social freedoms, and less legal rights than the men had. And of course, we also know that women do tend to be physically tend to be weaker than most men, but physical strength is definitely not what is required for protecting and caring for people. In difficult and dangerous situations, courage, enterprise, and intelligence can be what is most needed. These qualities are not tied to gender. It has nothing to do with gender being a protector. One of the strongest catalysts for the protective sense in women to be activated is when we become mothers. You don't have to be a mother to be protective, but we all know, all you women or mothers, you guys know it kicks in so hard. Every time I had 4 children, and every single time I got pregnant, I had a dream about an alligator trying to get my kid. I have no idea why. And if you're into dreams, please don't tell me anything because it'll be something weird. But alligators were in my backyard and I was trying to rescue my children. So it's just those weird things, And when I was a children's pastor, I would have dreams of trying to figure out how to protect and save, like there would be like a fire in the building, and how can I get all of my own children and all of the children's church children out and protected, because that's just how you feel. You just are in this mothering protective mode. That mama bear feeling can develop for those who are not even your own biological children, protecting young people. You know, I tend to pay attention to teenagers. My sister has an entire charity, Oak Tree Resources, that is about taking care of young people who are in homeless situations. And of course we know about the foster care system and things like that, but sometimes it's just your kid brings home their friend from school. You start hearing a few stories, and next thing you know, you're taking care of that kid. You got that kid, you're picking them up from school, you're taking them on your trips with you, you're letting them eat your food and stay at your house all the time. And just, it doesn't matter, just all of a sudden that mothering, that protection, it develops for another kid. Or another person. It's the desire to cover and take care of the weak and keep harm from them in any way that you can. All right, our passage for the evening is in 2 Samuel. If you guys want to open your Holly Bibles, in 2 Samuel 21. There's this passage, 14 verses, and it's talking about, once again, a famine has come to the land. And this a 3-year famine, and this has caused King David to inquire of the Lord of its cause. Hey, God, why are we having this famine? King David finally says. And the Lord told David that the famine was because Saul, remember him, that guy that was always chasing David, he had killed the Gibeonites. Not a group that I know much about, but he had killed the Gibeonites, even though there had been a treaty with them. When King Saul killed the Gibeonites, he had violated the treaty of protection that Joshua had made 400 years earlier with them. And God was still looking for justice on behalf of the Gibeonites. He held to that contract, even though Saul had not. Saul had broken the treaty Joshua had made, and it triggered this divine punishment. A 3-year famine had happened, and so far it had lasted 3 years. Saul had, by this time, was dead, and but the kingdom was in 2 parts. David had Judah, and Saul's son had Israel. I think that's right. When David learned that the famine resulted from a broken treaty, he went to the Gibeonites and he asked them what he could do to atone for Saul's infraction. The Gibeonites said that they required, we know what you can do, they said very powerfully. They said, hey, we know exactly what you can do. We don't even have to think about it. We need the 7 of Saul's sons, and we're going to kill them. Public execution. Put them out there for everybody, and that'll take care of it. That'll take care of exactly what we need to deal with this horrible thing that Saul did by breaking the treaty. So David agreed. Good idea, Gibeonites. That's a great idea. I'm just going to go round up a couple of kids. So he hands over 5 sons of Merab, Saul's daughter. So it's actually Saul's grandchildren, 5 grandchildren, and then 2 sons of Rizpah, who was Saul's concubine. So 2 of Saul's sons and 5 of his grandsons, and they were handed over by King David to the Gibeonites to execute. Public exposure, and he was going to kill them. So here's what the passage says. So the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, Armoni and Mephibosheth. Now, apparently there are 2 Mephibosheths. There is another Mephibosheth who was the son of Jonathan, and if you recall, David had a covenant with Jonathan, and so he took care of Mephibosheth, and he protected him. This is not the same guy. This is Armoni and Mephibosheth, Rizpah's 2 sons, whom she had birthed for Saul, and the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, and he handed them over to the Gibeonites. They hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. The 7 of them died at the same time. They were executed in the first days of the harvest, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Don't forget that part. Now, let's talk about Rizpah for a second. Anybody ever heard of Rizpah? Wave your hand if you've heard of Rizpah. I may not be saying her name right, but this is what we're going with. Rizpah. The first time we meet Rizpah is in 2 Samuel 3. We're told that Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, and that after Saul's death, Ishbosheth, who's the new king of Israel, one of his sons, accused Abner, his general, who actually happened to be David's uncle. Side note, fun fact, I think that's right. Accused Abner, his military commander, of sleeping with Rizpah. So Ishbosheth, king of Israel, he says, Abner, you've been sleeping with the concubine. You've been sleeping with her. And so this was a big deal because royal concubines were kept under very close supervision. They had some privileges, food, clothing, things like that. They had come into the king's harem through some sort of political alliance, or maybe from the slave market, or maybe it was just like, hey, line up all the beautiful women. I picked that one. And they brought prestige to the king, of course. For the concubine, she had one job. We know what it was: look good and please the king and make babies. Usually the queen mother or the head eunuch managed the harem and gave the concubine access to the king. And the wives and the concubines of a king that died, like Saul, when he died, the conqueror, which eventually was David, they became the concubine, then became the property of the successor. So eventually David does get hold of Rizpah, but that's a whole nother thing. Okay, so Abner gets accused of sleeping with her, and it's super serious. And if it's true, that means that Abner is doing it because he's trying to overtake Ishbosheth. He wasn't just like saying, hey, she's pretty, I think I'll sleep with her. It's actually like this whole political ploy thing. If you can have sex with one of the members of the harem of a dead king, then you get to lay claim to the throne. So Abner knew what he was doing. There is a possibility that it might have been Rizpah's idea. We have no idea. She might have been like, hey, Abner, dude, we can like have a connection here, and then you and I can both have a pretty good life together. You know, we'll both be in charge. We don't really know. All we know is Abner was the one that was accused. Apparently Ishbosheth believed that Abner was the one at fault. He had a quarrel with him. He kicked him out. Abner runs to David and is like, David, hey, can I hang out with you now? And David's like, sure. And then Joab goes and kills him because Joab had a temper. Okay, so Abner leaves. And so then Rizpah is defenseless. Apparently Ishbosheth didn't think it was her fault because he let her survive and he let her son survive. But Abner, he was out, and he got assassinated by David later on. Now Rizpah was this concubine of and now a dead king. Eventually, so she was used in a power play by his general, and eventually David conquers Ishbosheth, and she becomes a part of David's harem. So this is a woman who really has no power. She probably had this much power because she had a couple of sons early on, but she really has no power. She's just this woman who's being used. So she's got revenge that's been done around her and to her, and not to her, but issues going on. There's retribution issues going on. There's a whole religious structure, you know, of Israel and what can be done and what couldn't be done. And we're going to see more of this religious aspect of it in a minute. And all at work, and she has to just sit by and watch everything get ripped from her, and her sons now have been taken from her, and she has nothing. The Gibeonites had demanded this sacrifice for their pain, and David gives them exactly what they want. It does not say that David asked the Lord if it was okay. He just asked the Gibeonites, and that's what they wanted, so that's what he gave them. Rizpah's 2 sons, along with 5 of Saul's grandsons, had been handed over to the Gibeonites and hanged. She could do nothing. This was all done by David, seemingly to please the Lord. He never asked the Lord what God wanted him to do to end the famine. He just did what he thought was the right thing, as David has been known to do. So when you read this story in 2 Samuel, you see that we find throughout the Old Testament these terrible, violent tales of power and vengeance, and in the name of God, and God told me to do this, and you're like, oh, did God tell you that? And well, I'm going to take revenge over here, and I'm going to take this one if I want it, and I'm going to murder that one if I want to. And it's all done in the name of God, maybe the God of the Hebrews, or maybe an idol, but it's all done in some sort of religious name. But in the middle of this story, in the middle of 14 passages of vengeance and death and destruction, we see a mother. This one little passage, we see a mother. One of those passages where you have to look a little bit deeper and you see really, truly God's heart and the heart of a mother. This actions of a mother. Rizpah had watched her sons die, and then she did the only thing she could. Rizpah did for her sons in death what she could not do for them in life. She protected them from the predators who were after them. But this time she couldn't do anything about the human predators. It had to be the ones, the animal ones. This grieving mother takes up this silent vigil over the bodies of her children that had been left on this hill exposed, and she couldn't stop David. She couldn't stop the Gibeonites. She does what she can. It says in 2 Samuel, Rizpah took funeral clothing or a sackcloth. She spread it out by herself on a rock. She stayed there from the beginning of the harvest until the rains poured down on the bodies from the sky. She wouldn't let any birds of prey land on the bodies during the day or let animals come at nighttime. The law of the land was that a body that died should be buried by sundown. That was not done. Another injustice was done to her children, to her family. Sackcloth. She sat down on sackcloth. It's a sign, not just she just didn't. It wasn't just something to sit on, you guys. This was her saying, God, look at me, look at my sons, look at this injustice. Pay attention, God. I need you to see this. This is all I have. And she sat there, and then sometimes I have a feeling she used it and she waved it and did whatever she could to keep those animals, to keep the birds, to keep everybody, any eyes looking, any animals, anybody from all for all this time to bring notice to the injustice that had been done to her and to her children. She stayed at the scene of execution, guarding her sons night and day, good weather, bad weather, for 4 to 6 months. That's the times of the harvest that it refers to. She could not stop the Gibeonites. She could not confront the king directly and demand justice. She could not bury her sons. The only thing she knows to do is to hold a vigil over her sons until they receive the justice they deserve. It turned out she was not completely powerless. Her truth and the justice it demands shamed the most powerful person of her day, King David, to act on behalf of the dead. Word got back to David of what Rizpah was doing. 5 months, maybe 6 months of this horrific vigil that she had done for her children and for justice and for just for her sons to be buried and given a place that she could then go to later. But word got back to David of what Rizpah was doing, and the famine had not lifted. So maybe David was scratching his head. It didn't say that, but he decided to make things right. And it seems to be because he heard what Rizpah was doing, and all of a sudden it dawned on him. When David was told what Rizpah, Saul's secondary wife, what a way to be described in the Bible, right? Saul's secondary wife had done, he went and retrieved the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and he collected the bones of the men who had been hanged by the Gibeonites. The bones were then buried. Once everything the king had commanded was done, God responded to prayers for the land, and the famine was lifted. There was the rains came. Her vigil became an act of mourning and remembrance that drew public attention, demanded a response. But it was 5 or 6 months, you guys. Lynching Rizpah's and Merab's sons did not heal the land or the people. Doing right, justice for them and for what God had called for, recognizing what had been done to the Gibeonites, and then justice done for a proper burial and recognition of those who that injustice had been done to. Doing right by the multiply wrong woman did bring relief to the famine. The victory Rizpah received, her sons finally being properly buried, definitely could not take away her pain or her trauma completely. Rizpah was forever in the background. She never was a full wife. Her children were gone. She seemed to be alone in her grief for her sons, but God saw her pain and he brought justice to injustice. The rest of Israel may have moved on with their lives, but Rizpah pleaded with God and on that sackcloth, that symbol of her repentance and her mourning to God, until she and her sons were noticed. For 5 months, she stood on that piece of sackcloth and guarded over those dead bodies. She was hungry, sunburnt, scared, exhausted, smelly, inconsolable with grief, disbelief, anger, pain, and emptiness. I'm sure we can all imagine those feelings. It doesn't say that in the passage, but we know that. The anguish she felt was even greater, knowing their death was a result of Israel's spiritual failings. A dead king's pride, Saul, the current king's indifference to what was going on, but she never lost faith. She kept her vigil before God. She never left her guard. Now I'm going to tell you a similar story. In August 1955, a young man, 14-year-old African-American named Emmett Till, was lynched in Mississippi after being accused of offending a white woman in their family grocery store. His murder was horrific. It was so horrific, you guys. There was a description I read of all the things that were done to him. I did not want to put it on here because it is absolutely sickening what was done to him. And his body was dumped in the Tallahatchie River. His murderers were let go. They later admitted to it, and the girl who he was said to have done bothered, she later, years and years later, she also later admitted that none of it had happened. He had been in Mississippi visiting relatives, and so his body was returned to his mother in Chicago. When she saw the extent of the brutality on her son, now a bloated, unrecognizable corpse, she refused attempts to bury him quietly. She insisted on an open casket ceremony. She said, "I wanted the world to see what was done to my baby." It was, there are pictures of it. I don't suggest that you look at it, but of him. She let the press come and take pictures. It became a story that drew national attention. His stories, his photos of his mutilated body were circulated around the country. And that story and that truth of what was happening in America became a catalyst for the next phase of the civil rights movement. It was a huge catalyst. People saw in front of them. They saw what in their newspapers, and they heard the stories of what is done. They may or may not have agreed, or they may have disagreed, but it was right there in front of them, and she insisted on it, and she had to sit and look at that horror, but know that the same kind of vigil that Rizpah had, she was now going to have for her own child, and hope that it made a difference to those who were hopefully were going to pay attention. Rizpah's actions represent every mother who sees injustice done to her child, whether it is at the hands of a bully in a school or a big giant political scheme. A mother seeks to right the wrongs that have been done to her child, or to anyone around them that they feel that nurturing feelings for. Rizpah's vigil was powerful, but of course it did not bring her sons back. While she may have the satisfaction and closure of seeing hers and Merab's sons buried, her grief and the trauma of their deaths remained an open wound. Her story is not just about a nonviolent protest. It is about the realities of traumatic suffering and how we need to recognize the need to not only bring justice, but help people give meaning to their trauma, to the traumatic experience they have. Sometimes it is just simply sitting with them. I am not perfect at this. I'm trying to get better at it. But it is just recognizing the pain. When we see those who are going through trauma, we may not be able to do much for them, but sit with them, cry with them, listen to them, and remember that we are trying to recognize their pain the way God does. God tells us, and this is just one passage in Isaiah, but there's passages upon passages of God saying, this is who I am. This is the gospel. Seek justice, help the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow, take care of those who need mercy, who need to be recognized, who have trauma, who have pain, whether it's from a divorce, as we talked about, or something as horrific as an unjust death. In the Bible, God is described as a protector. He's described as a mother bear. I keep saying he, but there's the idea of God as a woman who is a nourishing, nurturing mother bear or mother bird, a hen or an eagle. And we in our lessons here have studied how God saw how the first human was alone and needed a companion. The first human needed an ezer kenegdo, a rescuer. It literally means a rescuer that will come and take care of the loneliness of this first human. Two humans now joined together in a union so that they won't be alone, so that they will be they can together take care of one another. That is what God desires for humans, for us to do for one another. And most women have a desire to protect others. Some believe and teach that women need to let men take on the role of protector. Oh, the women are weaker. Women are someone we need to protect. You need to sit down, be still, be quiet. You can't handle leadership, it's too stressful. You can't handle the goings on of a crazy church. We need to, you can't be on an elder board or a pastor. You need to be quiet in your home and just take care of the kids. The husband, will take care of those things. Teachings that we've been talking about for quite a while, the complementarian teachings, say that that men are should be in this role of protector. But the idea of protector is such a silly little thing. It's like someone who's standing at the door with a gun, or protecting, or the one who kills the spiders, or the one who answers the door if someone knocks late at night. And I think a lot of us know that sometimes we're the ones. Sometimes we're alone in the house. We're a single woman, or we're just braver. We're the ones who don't mind killing the spiders, or answering the front door if a stranger calls, or taking care of things with our kids that others are afraid to take, that our spouse might be a little nervous about taking care of. But claiming that it is the God-given job of a protector, that doesn't make any sense. And the reason we know it doesn't make any sense, that God is saying that men are supposed to be the protectors, the physical strength protectors. All you have to do is look at the Bible, because you see women protecting and saving, using this inner strength that they have and physical strength. Their cunning, their wisdom, spiritual gifts, quick wits, endurance, strategy, it's all through the word. And of course we see the protection of a woman like Rizpah, who not only had to have endurance and compassion and the ability to sit before God and wait until she got that justice, but she had to have physical strength to get rid of the birds and the predators who were coming after her children. We see with Moses, just even Moses' life, 5 women saved and protected Moses. Shiphrah and Puah were the midwives who went before Pharaoh, who said, I told you to kill all the baby boys. Why aren't they dead? And they were like, hey, Pharaoh, I don't know. These women, they're so strong. They're pushing out these babies before we can even get there. Sorry, Mr. Pharaoh. Of course, that was a lie. But they are the ones that helped him even be born, because of their cunning and their smartness, their strategy to lie to a Pharaoh to protect the babies. Jochebed, his mother, of course, we know what she did, gave birth and then put him in a basket. Totally fearless. Pharaoh's daughter found this baby, realized he was a Hebrew, but she still rescued him, protected him, adopted him. Miriam, his older sister, she watched over him from the very beginning of his life in that little basket down in the reeds down the river, and then ended up talking to the Pharaoh's daughter, convincing her, hey, I know this lady, she could nurse him, she could take care of him, until it was time for him to live in the Pharaoh's house. And then she ended up becoming a prophetess alongside Moses and Aaron, leading the children of Israel. And then, of course, Zipporah, his wife, a very strange story, his first wife, who God says that he's angry at Moses and he's going to kill Moses. And Zipporah realizes that it has to do with, what do you call that? Circumcision. Thank you. And so she takes care of that and throws it at Moses' feet, and it appeases God's anger. I don't have any idea what that means, why that all worked, but that was the story. And Zipporah protected, and her wits and her understanding of who God was and what he desired for Moses is what saved Moses' life. Other brave women of the Bible we know of who protected, who used their strength, physical and emotional, and their cunning and their strategies and their wisdom. Jael, of course, we know Jael, this woman of Thebes. She killed Abimelech. Rahab, Abigail, this servant girl who took secret messages to Jonathan. Another woman who hid Jonathan and his companion, and then lied as Absalom's troops were coming through and lied and said, oh, he went that way. Well, I mean, she would have been dead if they'd found out. Esther, of course. Priscilla risked her life for for Paul, along with her husband. Tamar, what a crazy story the story of Tamar is. You should look up that and what God did to bring justice to her. Naaman's wife, Naaman's wife's servant, her wisdom, the wise woman of Abel Beth Makkah. This is an interesting story that you should look up. There's a couple of references to these wise women of these towns, and so it's an interesting thing that just apparently it was. They think that Deborah might have been one of them too in this same category, that these women were put into positions of leadership over the town because of their wisdom, their understanding of the Lord and civil law and things like that. But she took care of Joab. I think she convinced Joab not to destroy the town. Of course, the women who stayed with Jesus at the cross, their bravery, the woman at the well and her great questions with Jesus, and then of course Phoebe, who brought the book of Romans, and Lydia, and of course above all we got Mary and her courage to give birth to Jesus and what she went through, and there's this passage that is about Mary that I've always held on to, and it says, it talks about when Jesus, they lost him for a while and they found him in the temple, and it says that she kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. And I think about that and I try to be like Mary. I'm not always that calm, but I try to be like that, because sometimes as women, as moms, or as women of God, we do have to calm down, and we have to sit and we have to ponder, and we have to say, God, what is it you're wanting? What is it you're saying? And there's a strength in that very few can understand if you haven't tried it, to sit still, to think, to try to hear what God is saying, and to know what the next move is that God might have you do, or the next prayer to pray, or the next person that you may need to go protect. We have to be still and quiet. That takes a strength that not many people understand. One of the greatest injustices that we see in the word was done against Hagar, and she had been used and thrown away by Abraham and Sarah, even though she had given birth and done what she was told to do, given birth to this wonderful young man named Ishmael, and she was sent away, and God heard her cry, and he kept the promise that he'd made to Abraham, and she gave God a name, and she said, El Roy, I believe it's pronounced, the God who sees me, the first person to ever name God. To be seen by God is one of the deepest cries of women. See me, God, hear me, know my heart, love me. These are the cries that we want, is like Hagar. We say we want to be seen by you. And I want to tell you, if nobody's ever told you this, he does see you. He does hear you. He is paying attention. In Psalm 56, there's this crazy passage where David is talking about these things that are happening to him, and the passage is like waves. It goes up and it goes down. Every verse is God, you are so great, but God, I'm in the depths of my pain, but God, I know you can save me, but God, I don't know if you can save me. And it just goes up and down. And it says at one point, David says, you yourself, God, have kept track of my misery. You put my tears into your bottle. Christians who narrowly define femininity or what a woman is, and prescribe these attributes or roles to women, that are doing women and even the church a great injustice. It's not true. Women can be anything that God calls us to be. We are strong, and we are protectors, and we are leaders. And we should never, no one should ever underestimate the power of a woman. No one should ever underestimate you. You're in charge. God is paying attention to you. He loves you. He sees you. He knows your tears. Gender has nothing to do with the spiritual gifts and the calling that God has for you. Even when she is in a place of ultimate vulnerability and weakness, you women can exhibit strength, tenacity, power like no other. And God always desires to bring justice for the weak. He recognizes the cries of a mother. He answers the cries of a mother. these right here, they represent all my tears, you guys. I've cried many tears. Many tears that I need God to remember. And I'm very glad that he's caught my tears, because it's difficult to be crying out and not know. And even as Rizpah, as one of our examples, to say, wow, she had to sit in that for those 5-6 months, to get that justice. And sometimes it's even longer than that. It can be a lifetime of asking for justice to be done. But please know that God hears you. He cares about you, and he loves you, and he wants for you what you want for you. He wants justice. He wants the people around you to be protected. He wants you to be protected. He loves you very, very much. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about tonight's lesson? You have to unmute. And remember, we're being recorded.
Oh, I really liked it. It was really good. I mean, I know I came in at the second half of it, but it was really, I never have heard the story of Rizpah. So I'm so excited that you told that story, because I may have read it at some point. I just probably just kind of went through it or something, but that was so good.
Thank you. That was very nice of you to say, Deborah. Well, I'm glad that it's a tough story, you guys, and I actually hesitated to tell it, because if we are going through a place that we are crying out to God for a situation, it can be tough to sit there and go, wow, but she did lose a lot too. In within the justice, there was loss. Within the good outcome, there was deep trauma and pain. And we need to help each other through that, you guys. We have to recognize trauma and pain, and realize that we've got to find new ways to help people. It's very easy to start shutting down. There's a lot going on all around us. I actually just like got out of town a couple last week. Just took a quick trip out of town. Just found myself a nice quiet place just to sit and talk with God for a while, because I was just becoming overwhelmed. And it was good, and everything was not resolved by the next morning, but I got a chance to worship. It wasn't worship the way maybe some do, because my worship, I'm not a very good singer. I don't I don't like dance around or anything like that, but the way you might think of worship. But I found my moments. I found my tears. I found moments where I could just talk to God. And I was about to turn, my birthday was about to happen, and I was just like, I'm gonna do a walkabout. I'm gonna have a little walkabout, me and God, just to kind of, just so I can throw all this stuff at him, and I won't be distracted by anything around me. And it was good, and it was also bad. It was tough, and not every situation got resolved that I'm still bringing up to the Lord. And some of it I got a bunch of kids, you guys. Eventually I'll have grandkids, and I'll have more things around me, and it'll be more and more stuff, and it doesn't really end. But you can find your peace in it, and especially for issues of injustice. I pray all of you guys will be able to hear what God is saying, and know that he does hear you. He does recognize you. He is a strong tower. He can bring you peace. And sometimes it's you being God's hands and your ears to someone else. So be that for other people as well, you guys. Sometimes, just yesterday, actually, I found out that a friend of mine suddenly passed away, and it was quite a blow. And she was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful human being. And in the little note that was written about her, somebody said that her theme in life, her motto in life, was "Live to Give." And when I read that, I thought, yes, that is totally, totally her. And I decided I'm gonna make myself a T-shirt. I'm gonna write it on a wall or a sticky note somewhere, because that is I'll make a mug that says "Live to Give," because that is a great one, and that's what we're trying to do. Our life can come from our giving as well, and our peace even can come if we can find some place to give. Sometimes, though, it's okay to just sit still and cry. Yes, ma'am.
Would the topic of women in leadership go in this theme, or is that different? topic.
What do you mean, women in leadership? Well, I mean, what do you mean?
Because, I don't know, because I feel like that's a big debate, I guess. Women in leadership. Should women have pastoral roles? Sorry. Should women have pastoral roles, or should they have like leadership roles in smaller categories, like over the children's ministry or youth?
Right. So you came in late to this series, but I actually have already discussed that one. There are some specific Bible verses in Corinthians and Timothy and things like that that are used about that. So I would encourage you to go back and check those out, or I can send you some quick articles, some things as well, because a lot of it is about taking verses out of context. And because when you look at the overall picture, you see women like Deborah, and you see women like Huldah and Phoebe and Mary Magdalene and a whole lot of other women who were in positions of leadership. Priscilla and Phoebe and Lydia, house church leaders and people who took the word. So it doesn't make any sense for Paul to say in these one little verse that we take, and it says, I do not allow a woman to speak. And yet over here, he actually has all these women who are speaking. So that must not be exactly what he meant, that one little verse. So I actually did talk about that in some other lessons earlier. So go to the resource page and look at that, and then I'll send you some stuff too. But yes, women in leadership, guess what, guys? Women get to do whatever God calls them to do. That's it. Put that one on the t-shirt. I actually have a t-shirt you can buy because it can be anything. We can be whatever God calls us to do. And it's and what we're looking for is to see what is God wanting for us, and to do, to take care of, who to protect, who to care for, who to give to. That is our goal in life. So anybody else, as we're ending up? Our last big one tonight. 2 good questions from the Drake house. All right, you guys, we will end this. I will end the recording, and if you have anything else, stay with me for a second after the recording. I will tell you a couple little logistical notes, but thank you for joining us in this series. Let your friends know if they want to check out the resource page, because I got a lot of good articles and stuff like that up there. And I really appreciate you. Go out and take care of the people around you, and go be free. That's not recording.